She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even pack properly. Sarah Monroe drove away from the only life she had known with nothing but a duffel bag, an old thermos of black coffee, and a worn map with no destination marked. Her marriage was over. Her job of 17 years had evaporated in a post-pandemic layoff. The apartment, once filled with laughter, weekend brunches, and forwarded emails about Q3 strategy, was now silent. Dead silent. The roads twisted through the hills of Oregon as the sky turned from ash gray to gold. The car's dashboard flickered, the gas tank nearly empty, but Sarah kept driving. Not toward something, just away, from noise, from expectations, from the polite people telling her, "You'll bounce back." What they didn't understand was that there was nothing to bounce back to. There was no one left to be. When she arrived at the house, her grandmother's old cabin, vacant for nearly a decade, she didn't bother turning on the lights. She just sat on the floor. No furniture, no phone signal. The silence wrapped around her like a blanket made of fog. No grief, no joy, no direction. Just breath. And something unfamiliar, a sense that maybe, just maybe, being empty wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning. The cabin smelled like dust and pine. Every creak in the floorboard echoed in the quiet, as if the house itself was adjusting to her presence. Sarah spent the first day doing nothing. She sat, she stood, she unpacked the duffel bag and folded her clothes into a drawer that still held a faded scarf and a photo of her grandmother smiling in a tomato garden. No TV, no internet, no calendar telling her what was next. Just a wood stove, a chipped kettle, and a few cans of beans she had barely remembered to bring. On the second morning, she walked outside with her thermos and sat on the old porch swing. The forest was still wet from an overnight rain, and a thin layer of mist drifted across the trees like a breath holding itself. She watched a crow pick at something in the grass. The world didn't seem to notice she had disappeared. She wasn't sure if that hurt, or if it was a kind of relief. The silence wasn't peaceful. Not yet. It was too sharp. It made her aware of everything. The way her heartbeat thudded too loud, the ache in her jaw from weeks of clenched teeth, the nervous habit of checking her phone even though it hadn't worked since she'd arrived. She felt like someone had unplugged her from the world but left the anxiety buzzing in her chest. It took 3 days before she did something without realizing it. She made tea. Not out of need, but from memory. Her grandmother had always boiled water over the fire in a dented tin kettle, steeped leaves in silence, and drank it slowly with both hands around the mug. That morning, Sarah mimicked the gesture. She lit the stove, waited, poured, and sat by the window holding warmth in her palms. For a moment, she didn't think about her ex-husband, the job interviews she'd canceled, or the pitying look on her friend Karen's face when she left. For a moment, she was just there. That was when she noticed the breath. Not in some dramatic, meditative way, but simply the inhale, the exhale, her body moving in time with the wind in the trees. She said nothing. She didn't try to be mindful or present. She just sat and breathed, and it felt real, more real than anything had in months. Sarah had always been someone who knew the plan. Straight-A student, MBA at 30, marketing director by 37, married at 38. By 42, she had a mortgage, a golden retriever, and a closet organized by color. Then COVID happened. The company restructured. Her team was cut. Her husband said he needed space, then found someone new in less than 2 months. The dog died. Her body stopped sleeping. And even worse, she didn't feel much about any of it. Just that awful, buzzing blankness. She had tried everything before she left. Therapy, yoga, digital detoxes. Nothing stuck. Nothing felt like it was hers. So when her aunt mailed her a spare key to the cabin, in case you need space, she left without telling anyone but Lena, her closest friend. Lena had understood. They'd known each other since college. Lena, who had gone through a painful divorce years earlier, had once said something that lingered. Emptiness isn't the enemy. It's just space that hasn't been given permission to be holy yet. At the time, Sarah had nodded, not understanding. Now, as she swept the floors of a house with no expectations, that phrase began to take root. On day 6, she walked deeper into the forest behind the cabin. She had no destination, just a pull. Wet branches brushed her coat. Mud sucked at her boots. But the deeper she went, the quieter her mind became. It was like the woods absorbed the static. A mile in, she found a clearing where the sun broke through the trees. She sat on a fallen log. No birdsong. Just her breath, just the weight of her own body on the earth. That's when she heard the axe. It was distant, rhythmic. Chop. Pause. Chop. She followed it out of curiosity, not caution. Around the bend was a man with dark skin, a gray beard, and the slow, purposeful movements of someone who had done this every morning for years. He looked up once and nodded, then returned to his task. "Morning," she said softly. He paused, set the axe down, and wiped his forehead with the sleeve of his flannel. "You're the Monroe girl." She blinked. "I guess I am." "I'm Elijah. Been looking after this land since your grandma passed." She nodded, unsure what else to say. "You staying long?" "I don't know." He smiled. "Good answer." They didn't talk much, but every morning after that, Elijah would be there, chopping wood, boiling tea in an old kettle on a stone ring. He didn't offer wisdom, didn't ask questions. One day, he handed her a mug without a word and gestured for her to sit. "You meditate?" he asked after a long silence. "I tried. Didn't go well." He chuckled. "Good. That means you're not pretending." She looked at him, confused. "Trying to fix yourself through meditation is like trying to fix water with a spoon," he said. "You don't fix. You just watch." She didn't respond. But the next morning she tried again. Not the apps, not the counting, just sitting. 3 breaths. Inhale, here. Exhale, now. Again. Again. No goal. Just the moment. Later that evening, she lit a candle and wrote her first journal entry in weeks. Not about healing, not about progress. Just this. "I boiled water. I drank it. I was here." It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had in a long time. The days began to lose their names. Morning bled into afternoon, into dusk, into a dark so complete it swallowed sound. Sarah started measuring time by light, the angle of sun on the floorboards, the stretch of her shadow across the cabin porch. There was no schedule, no pings or buzzes. Her phone sat dead in a drawer, and she didn't miss it. Instead, she tracked the weather. She watched the steam rise from her tea. She swept pine needles off the porch like it mattered. One morning she woke to the sound of rain. It wasn't gentle. It pounded the roof like 1,000 tiny knocks, and Sarah lay there under the blankets, eyes open, listening. That's all she did. Listen, and for the first time in a long time, the silence inside her didn't feel like failure. It felt like space. Elijah knocked once before letting himself in, as he always did. He brought carrots from his garden and a bag of rice. She cooked while he chopped kindling in the back. They moved around each other like people who had known each other far longer than they had. At dinner, she asked, "Do you ever feel like you've disappeared?" He looked up from his bowl and said nothing for a while. "I used to think that was a bad thing," he said eventually. Then I realized, sometimes disappearing is just shedding what was never you to begin with. She chewed her food, slow. That idea, that maybe the version of her who had climbed corporate ladders, signed anniversary cards with forced smiles, and powered through burnout like it was a sport, had been someone she had learned to be, not someone she really was. "You miss it?" she asked. Elijah leaned back. The noise? The titles? The illusion of control? No, I miss the people sometimes, but I don't miss the pretending. She didn't say anything, but inside her, something unlatched. The next week, she stopped wearing her watch. She stopped brushing her hair into anything but a loose knot. She stopped narrating her every action in her head. She just lived. One day she found an old gardening spade in the shed and started pulling weeds out of the front yard. Not because she had a plan to plant anything, just because the weeds were there. Her muscles ached by the end, but she felt calm, used, settled. That night she fell asleep before the stars came out. Then, out of nowhere, the world came calling again. An email from her old company. They were restructuring again. There was a new leadership position. Remote, flexible, high-paying. They wanted her to apply. The message was full of polite language and subtle flattery. They missed her leadership. They thought she could stabilize the brand's post-COVID identity. She stared at the screen for a long time. She walked out onto the porch. The air was cold. A squirrel darted across the railing. She felt her pulse rise, not from excitement, but from that old reflex. Perform, achieve, win. She knew that version of herself so well. But she also knew something now she hadn't before. Quiet is not emptiness. It is presence. She found Elijah by the riverbank, stacking stones. "They want me back," she said. He didn't stop what he was doing. "And what do you want?" She hesitated. "I don't know anymore." "Then don't decide today," he said. "Decisions made in noise usually serve the noise." She sat beside him, the sound of water rushing between them. There was no answer. And yet, that absence of urgency, that lack of pressure, felt more honest than anything she'd heard in months. That night, she didn't respond to the email. She didn't delete it either. She let it sit in the inbox like a stone on the riverbed, unmoving, untouched by rushing water. In the following days, she began waking earlier, watching the fog lift off the grass, listening to the wood crack as it burned in the stove. She journaled, not with goals or self-analysis, just observations. "The crows are louder today. My left foot is always colder in the morning. I felt something like peace when I cracked the egg. The old self, the one who measured worth by productivity, who counted success in promotions and replies, was fading, not dramatically, but gently, like mist." Then came the dream. She saw herself in a mirrored room. Each wall reflected a different version. Sarah the boss, Sarah the wife, Sarah the achiever, Sarah the good daughter. None of them were moving. They stared at her, frozen in poses of effort, and in the center stood the version now, hair loose, flannel shirt, no makeup, hands dirty from pulling weeds. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't sad. She was simply breathing. When she woke, she didn't analyze the dream. She didn't write about it. She simply stepped outside barefoot, felt the cold moss under her feet, and said aloud to the trees, "I'm still here." Elijah later told her, "You know what the Buddha said when he awakened under the Bodhi tree?" She shook her head. He smiled. He touched the earth. That's it. No speech, no sermon. He just touched the ground and said, "This is enough." Sarah didn't cry. She didn't smile either. But something inside her shifted. She didn't know what kind of life she was going to live after this. She didn't know if she'd return to the city, or stay, or leave for somewhere else entirely. But she knew one thing with quiet certainty. She had found her ground. And it wasn't built on achievement, roles, or other people's needs. It was built on stillness, breath, and the small, stubborn miracle of beginning again. The first frost came silently. Sarah woke to windows glazed with delicate ice, the breath of the forest clinging to the glass like fingerprints from another world. She wrapped herself in a blanket and stepped outside, mug in hand, breath visible in the pale morning light. The silence didn't unsettle her anymore. It felt earned, like a room that had finally been cleared of noise. Life had not dramatically changed. She still boiled water, still swept pine needles, still walked to the river and sat beside Elijah without needing to fill the space between them. But something subtle had begun to unfold. Not a breakthrough, but a deep settling. It wasn't that she had found herself. It was that she'd stopped searching. She received another email, then a second one, more direct. Her old company was offering her the position outright now, no application required. They'd even attached the proposed salary, more than she had ever made. Her chest tightened, but not in the old, panicked way. It was more like the tug of a tide on the shore, familiar, strong, but no longer terrifying. That evening, she walked deeper into the forest. She found a grove she hadn't seen before, where the light slanted in golden streaks across fallen leaves. She stood there for a long time, doing nothing, just watching how the world kept turning without her needing to push it, how the sun kept moving, how the trees remained upright, how the river ran in one direction without asking her opinion. It was the first time she felt, without bitterness or shame, that she was not necessary. And somehow, that was beautiful. When she returned to the cabin, Elijah was waiting on the porch, whittling a stick with slow, precise strokes. She sat beside him. "Tell me something honest," she said. He didn't look up. "Every morning I ask myself if it's okay to not be useful today," she nodded. "And what's the answer?" "Usually, it's yes." The next morning she opened her laptop, not to reply, just to write something for herself. She opened a blank document and typed, "I am not a resume, I am not an apology, I am not behind." She saved it, closed the lid, and went outside to sweep the porch again. Later that week, Lena called. The call came through the landline Elijah had installed years ago for emergencies. It hadn't rung once in Sarah's stay. The sound startled her. She hesitated before answering. Lena's voice was warm, a little worried. "Hey, I just wanted to hear your voice. Are you okay?" Sarah hesitated, then smiled. "I think so," she said. "I think I'm quiet, and that feels like enough." They talked for a while. About nothing, really. About how people were moving on, how fast the city had started to pretend the pandemic never happened. How Karen had just posted a new video about productivity hacks. Lena laughed, but there was a sadness underneath it. "I miss you," she said. "I miss you too." "You coming back?" "I don't know." "That's okay," Lena said softly. "Just stay close to yourself, okay?" After the call, Sarah sat on the porch, the phone still in her hand. She realized she didn't feel guilty. Not for leaving, not for not rushing back. There was no obligation anymore to become anything other than what she already was. She thought of her grandmother, how she used to hum while shelling peas, how she never rushed. She remembered sitting beside her as a child, watching her hands move with care and slowness. No one had ever called her grandmother successful, but Sarah had never known anyone more whole. That night, she lit a single candle and sat in silence. She placed both hands on her chest and just listened. Her heartbeat, her breath, the creak of the house. She didn't need to name the feeling. She didn't need to fix anything. She didn't need to plan what came next. It was enough. The next day, Elijah handed her a folded piece of paper before heading off to the river. "I wrote you something," he said. She waited until he was gone to open it. In his crooked handwriting it read, "When the bowl breaks, it doesn't lose its shape. It just holds the light differently." She read it 3 times, then folded it, placed it inside her journal, and made tea. Autumn deepened. The days grew shorter. The quiet grew thicker. Sarah walked more, thought less. She watched birds migrate overhead and found herself silently cheering them on. Not because she wanted to follow, but because she finally understood why they left and why they always came back. Some part of her might go back too, eventually, but not from fear, and not for survival. One morning she stood barefoot in the frost, looked up at the trees and whispered, "I forgive myself for not knowing what I didn't know." That was the moment something inside her fully unclenched. No audience, no applause, just a soft, interior letting go. She didn't need the job. She didn't need the past. She didn't need to prove she had healed. She was simply alive, present, breathing. And for now, that was the only miracle required. The final morning was quiet in a different way. Not empty, just still. Sarah packed slowly, not because she was in a rush to leave, but because she finally understood there was no going back. There was no version of herself to return to. There was only forward, and forward didn't have to look like anything she used to chase. She stood on the porch with her bag slung over one shoulder, staring at the trees that had held her like old friends. Elijah didn't come to say goodbye. He didn't need to. His silence had taught her more than most words ever could. She walked to the clearing one last time, the one where the light came through the trees like breath. She didn't cry. She didn't mark the moment with any grand ritual. She just stood there, closed her eyes and whispered, "I'm here. No fixing. No finishing. No before or after. Just that simple presence she had run from for years, and now had finally come home to." If you're watching this and feel like everything you knew has disappeared, if you're sitting in the aftershock of loss, of silence, of not knowing who you are anymore, don't rush to rebuild. Don't force a new version of yourself to rise from the ruins. Pause. Let the quiet in. Because sometimes what looks like the end is actually a doorway. And what feels like nothing is really space. Space for something honest, slow, and entirely your own to begin. So here's the invitation. Don't chase clarity. Breathe. Right now, with me. Inhale. Here. Exhale, now, again. That's enough. You are enough. If this story met you somewhere real, share a moment below, any moment, where you felt like everything fell apart. You're not alone. We're all just finding our way back to the ground, one quiet breath at a time. Maybe emptiness isn't something to escape. Maybe it's something to witness, to sit beside, like an old companion who doesn't speak but stays. We spend so much of our lives trying to fill the silence with plans, people, progress. But there comes a moment when all of it falls away. And in that stillness, we meet something we've been avoiding all along. The self that exists beneath the noise. Sarah didn't rebuild her life overnight. She didn't walk out of the woods with a 5-step plan or a perfect mantra. She simply stayed. She listened. She allowed herself to be no one for a while. And in that space, something quiet began to breathe again. This isn't a story about reinvention. It's a story about return. A return to simplicity, to breath, to the strange, tender clarity that can only be found when we stop pretending we're okay and just be. So if you find yourself in the middle of nowhere, lost in the in-between, trust that you're not broken. You're not behind. You're simply becoming. And that becoming? It doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be yours.